Hello, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Your hair looks a little wild this morning, Ron.
Yeah, curly hair first thing when you get up, it's a gamble. So
Mine would look that way if I had any hair.
yeah, it's how it is.
Good. Hey, Emma, how are you? Hey, Madison. Madison, is your camera still fried?
Yeah, unfortunately so. I'm hoping to get a new laptop for next semester.
You're forever stuck with a slightly perplexed look on your face in that photo.
Yeah, I need to I want to take some good photos in the ARB.
Yeah, of all people. Madison.
I'm better behind the camera than in front of it.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I hear you on that.
Yeah, selfies are hard. It's kind of like writing a bio or something, or writing a, like when you go to college and you have to write a letter about yourself or something. It's very cringy and embarrassing. I feel the same way about selfies sometimes.
Well, I find it easier to do selfies than to take pictures of my daughter, for instance, who's like the most difficult person to photograph.
Oh yeah,
Very oppositional.
gotcha. Yes, I remember being like that as well. So
Yeah, I find the way that I take selfies for professional pictures without looking too crazy. Mine, it's still a little much, as I just prop it up on something and do a timer for a couple seconds so you don't get the weird arm angle.
See, Larissa now is on some nice looking beach that looks like it's on the West Coast or something like that.
Yeah, it was in California more than a year ago.
Is that a Bay Area I'm looking at?
It was north of Santa Barbara, I think.
Oh.
It was around some dunes and stuff, and it was north of or it wasn't too far from one of the big parks. I can't remember the name of the park. Like state parks or national park.
It's interesting the photos people choose of themselves. Adriana, your dog is more visible than you are. As a matter of fact, is that really you in that photo?
I'm making everyone co-presenters, right, John?
Exactly, so that we can migrate among groups after I create groups. So that is what I appreciate you doing. And thank you for doing that.
No problem. Can you make me co-host?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not do that? I need to do that before you can do anything. I thought you were hard at work doing that, but you don't have the capacity to be hard at work doing that. Maybe I even need to make you host. I think I might need to.
I think that's correct. Yeah, and then I make.
Okay, so you'll have to make me host before you leave. Otherwise, I think it'll randomly make someone the host.
Yeah, we got this.
It's good. Hello, everyone. Turn on your cameras. None of us should be embarrassed. It is the morning. Some of you probably haven't had your coffee yet. I understand that. We'll all just accept that reality. It's good to see your faces, actually. The irony of Zoom. The only time I can see your faces is when we're not actually together. An odd thing. But you're a handsome lot. You should feel proud of yourselves for that. Although Ava is eating her breakfast with us right now. What do you have in your mouth there, Ava? Anyone wants to say anything to embarrass anyone else on this intro portion of our class today, you're free to do that as long as it's friendly teasing. Chris is smiling. He's got a sense of humor this morning. Julie, is that caffeinated, that thing you're drinking there?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. See, I've had my caffeine. I get 1 dose for the day in the morning. If I had more than that, I would not be able to sleep. I've got my lightweight jitters on after a heavy dose of caffeine.
Ooh, I am powered by caffeine all day. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I couldn't do that. Michael Pollan, who we'll do a little reading from Michael Pollan's book Omnivore's Dilemma later. Some of you probably already read some of that book, but has a great book on the history of caffeine as a drug. It's quite an impressive book. I recommend it. I think his claim is we would cease to function more or less if we didn't have caffeine. Yeah. Most commonly used drug. It's good.
They say it's good for you though, having it once a day.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are actually fairly few downsides. I mean, as part of Michael Pollan's research for this book, he went cold turkey on caffeine, and he said he almost couldn't write the book because he was so dysfunctional after having stopped drinking caffeine. But he said the reward was that after sort of a long period of not drinking caffeine, it became like a totally new experience for him to start up again.
Yep.
So
that's the only reason to take a tolerance break on coffee.
Oh, right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, even though we're still missing many members of our class, but that's okay. So Rowan is joining us today to help make you guys all co-hosts so that we can migrate among rooms for our case study. But I do, as usual, have a bunch of sort of details I want to cover. And let's see, how do I want to do this? I want to share my screen. Oh, you have to allow me to share because you're the host, and I'm not even co-host right now. All right, thank you. All right, now let's get this show on the road. Okay, does everyone see my screen okay? Great. Well, let me know if you have any questions, because I actually have a mode where I don't see you right now so that I can see my screen. Actually, I want to have at least someone on here. All right, so we're going to focus principally today on a case study that I actually really enjoy doing. It's a topic that we haven't talked a whole lot about, but it's actually really quite important and quite nuanced in its complexity. And I'm hoping that today's case will help us all to get our heads wrapped around the difficulty of thinking about the role of technology in solving environmental problems. So the readings for today, I think, are particularly important to the case. And if you haven't already done them, I hope you have done them because they're so relevant to the case. Please make sure you do, because I really want you to make reference to those in your discussions of today's case, because they're really quite important in helping us to think about relationships between technology and society. But let me first talk a little bit about details for this week. So the first thing I want to say is on your syllabus, on the schedule, there are conferences for this week. We just posted a link for groups to sign up for conferences. We're spreading them out over the whole week between tomorrow and next Friday to try to make sure we can get convenient times for people to meet. As described on the syllabus, the point of these is really to have time to sit back with Maddie and kind of reflect on the interview experience, the content you're developing, and just have some time to get feedback on that and begin to think about your final interview, which is coming up. I want to say that I think I was overly optimistic in how quickly I could get community members lined up for interviews. So we're delaying when you need to commit to your interviewees for a week, mostly because there's nothing for you to commit to right now because I haven't posted anything on that. But you've got a lot on your plate, so I'm sure that's not an unwelcome news that we're sort of delaying a couple of the assignments related to your next interview. Are there any questions on your progress on Community Voice? As I said last class, just looking at the content you've been creating, it seems like this is, for many of you, a pretty cool and interesting experience, and you're developing some neat stuff. Does anyone have any questions or anything to say about how things are going on that? All right. So I'll just to sort of foreshadow some things coming up next week that you don't need to worry about, but I just want to mention you're going to have a new assignment that I think you'll have some fun with next week, a resource use signature assignment. We'll talk about that on Tuesday's class, and not this weekend, but next weekend we're going to do a little tour. I'm just pointing out what's already on the syllabus. That will probably be by Zoom, although I'm tempted to sort of figure out some way to let some of you participate directly, because it would be more fun for me than wandering around with the camera, which is what I did last year, which was fun and cool, but it'd be neat to have people there. All right, any questions on anything about the class before I launch into today? Okay, great. I want to say a little bit about where we are, where we're headed, and where we are. So just to provide a little bit of sort of context, what we've tried to do over the course of the semester so far is kind of expose you to contrasting ways of thinking about the world, contrasting viewpoints on our relationship with the world, how we think about the world. Obviously these different ethical perspectives we've been working on recently, different perspectives on common pool resources that Carl Ofen talked about last class. And so today I want to address sort of another kind of set of ways of thinking about human relationships with each other and how they're mediated with each other in the natural environment, and specifically how they're mediated by science and technology. So we talked a little bit about science and the scientific method before as a way of knowing about the world. But today, based in large part on the two readings for today, the one by Langdon Winter and Robert Sinsheimer, I want to think a little bit about kind of the assumptions, many of them implicit in how we conceptualize our relationship with the natural world, and what we learn through science. And there are kind of some underlying implicit assumptions in the way the world, I would say, the Western world anyways, thinks about scientific knowledge and about technology. And I think in a general sense, we've lived in an age in which people assume that knowledge is good and more knowledge is always better. And that so, we should be seeking more scientific knowledge and understand the world better because it's good to know things, and the more we know, the better. The Sinsheimer article, I think, challenges a bit of that view. It at least asks the questions, is more knowledge about all things always good? And it's worth pondering that as we reflect on where we are in terms of our scientific understanding of the world. But the other key assumption has also been that new technology is inevitably good. And for a long time, those who were optimistic about our relationship with the natural world, from both sides of the political spectrum actually, have often pointed towards technology as something that is always advancing, and whatever our current problems are, we will come up with technological solutions to them. And so to some extent, we shouldn't worry too much about environmental problems, because we'll come up with some sort of technological solution that will solve those problems. As I think one of the readings points out, 100 years ago, probably the principal environmental problem in New York City was that people were living in mounds of animal dung in the roads from all the horse traffic. And it was kind of untenable living with all that poop. Well, the car was invented, the horses went away, and that problem was gone. It's just no longer an issue of any kind. So an example of a technological problem that was met and mastered. And I think, one of the things that I've seen in recent years with the sort of, I guess I would say, pro-fossil fuel constituency is this idea. Well, we'll capture the carbon. We'll develop carbon capture technologies, which will pull the CO2 out of the atmosphere and solve the problem that way. And we just need to figure out how to do that. So I think, whenever there's a problem, people often point towards a technological solution. We do operate with this assumption technology is a good thing. So I want to kind of have us think and kind of challenge that assumption a little bit today, and ask the question: to what extent does technology reflect, reinforce, or determine our relationships with each other and the natural world and environment? And that's really comes out of the Langdon-Winter reading. Is additional scientific understanding of all things necessarily good? Is it consistent with ethical principles for human relationships with each other and with our natural environment? I think this case study really allows us to get at these two questions. How does technology reflect, reinforce, or determine our relationships? And is additional scientific understanding of all things necessarily good? So I want you to use these as sort of guiding questions as we think about this particular case study. And Sinsheimer brings up this, kind of interesting concept, or introduces this interesting concept that he calls the certainty principle. So most of you are probably familiar with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It really has to do with sort of electrons but it's used as a metaphor. So in its metaphorical sense, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle basically says you can't observe something without being affected, without affecting that you're observed. So when you start to look at something, it actually changes the way that thing behaves. And he sort of flips that around and puts forward this notion of a certainty principle. And that is, we can't observe something without it affecting us. Once we've seen something, we act differently. And obviously that's a statement about the nature of scientific understanding. Once we know something, the world is changed by that knowledge. And it might not be changed in a good way, is I think one of the things he's pointing out. And so maybe it would be better if we didn't know certain things, if the things that we know actually end up affecting us badly. So those are again sort of the underpinning questions I want you to be thinking about. So let's talk a little bit about, and I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes before we get into the case, about the effects of technology on humans and their relationship with the environment. And one thing we can talk about is sort of the direct effects of technology on people and the environment. So, that is, obviously there are a lot of technologies out there, and we talk about things. Burning fossil fuels creates pollution. The way in which we produce meat in the United States can be said to, involve cruelty. The CAFOs, the confined area feeding lots, are, many people would say they're extraordinarily cruel. The way we manage animals also creates health risks. So, there are certain things about technology, or there's some technologies that are just dangerous and create health risks that way. So the point is, I want to distinguish between a direct effect of technology on people. So many technologies, they have a direct negative effect or positive effect on people and on the environment. But the other important thing to understand, because we often think about the direct effects, is the relationships embodied in technology. So when you introduce a new technology, the thought here is that depending on the nature of technology, it's going to affect the way people interact with each other, and it's going to affect the way that people interact with the natural environment. And so when we introduce a new technology, presumably we should think about not just its direct effects on people and the environment, but how it affects the way people interact with each other and the environment. So it's an important distinction. And to help us out with that, I wanted to sort of like do kind of like a mini pre-case study in which we look at 3 local technologies here in Northeast Ohio, 2 of them fairly personal technologies. So I'll say something about each of these. On the left, you have an Amish woman driving a horse and buggy. The Amish are very, very interesting from a technological perspective. Most of you probably have some familiarity with this religious group. It's they're members of a religious community, part of the Anabaptist tradition. Most Amish people live in Pennsylvania, and a large population in Ohio as well. A little bit south of us. You don't need to go very far south actually to get into Amish country. A little bit of drive, 20 minutes south of us, and you begin to get into Amish community, and then you get into much denser Amish communities. But they've taken a very interesting approach to technology. Don't have time to talk fully about it today because it's very interesting, their view of technology, but they kind of, in some ways, froze technology in the 1800s and said, we are not going to adopt a lot of newer technology. That's not completely true what I said, but so you see a lot of horse and buggies on the road and people traveling in them in sort of older looking dress, and so I want to think a little bit about their technology. In particular, these are all examples of transportation technologies, right? So this is how they get about. That little photo in the middle is a photo shoot with some 101 students from 2 years ago, not this last spring, but 2 years ago. They were shooting photos for their project was to shoot photos for Community Voices, and this is a photo of actually my car, my Chevy Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid, and they were trying to encourage people to use the plug-in. There's free, the city provides free plug-in down by, that's the library behind them there, so you can see it plugged in. So that's that car. And then on the right is a bicycle that I rode for the first decade after I arrived in Oberlin College. I just, as kind of like a challenge for myself, when I arrived at Oberlin in January of 2000 as a new faculty member, I said, I'm going to go into the bike co-op. I'm going to take junk bike parts that no one could, that are just not a rideable bike, but I'm going to give myself 2 hours and I'm going to put together a vehicle that I can ride. And I rode that for 10 years. I still have it in my garage, but it's made from parts from lots of different bicycles. And it's actually a pretty awesome bike, but you can see it looks kind of kludged together from different bike parts. I was a bike mechanic in a former life, so yeah. So I want you to just think about these different technologies here and what I've said about them, and then I want you to consider several questions quickly and throw out some ideas. So the questions are: what environmental effects are associated with the manufacture, use, maintenance, and disposal of each of these alternate technologies for moving around the landscape? So this is the kind of direct effects of these on the environment. How does each technology influence the way the user experiences the physical environment? And then finally, how is each technology influenced by, and how does it influence economic, political, and social relationships? These are big questions. I just want to stimulate your thinking on this. So let's just go ahead and start quickly with this first question. What environmental effects are associated with the manufacture, use, maintenance, and disposal of each of these alternate modes of transportation? So hopefully the coffee's kicking in for some of you. Yeah, go ahead, Emma.
Well, at least for like the car and the bike, it would require like the mining of the metals and then the creation of the rubber and the plastic parts, which would release I believe, CO2 in the production.
Oops.
And specifically for the car, if it's electric, it would probably have more rare metals mined for it, for like the computer circuit board and the battery.
Oops, I keep on accidentally advancing. Yes, that's good. So there's a whole sort of infrastructure, a global supply chain involved in both the bike and the car. And implicitly, you're saying that that's probably much less true for the buggy. Probably a lot of that material is produced relatively locally and not as much smaller footprint perhaps, and less, much more localized. Anyone else want to add to that that thought on sort of environmental effects associated with use, maintenance, and disposal? Yes, go ahead, Noel.
I want to add that. So for the buggy in particular, how I thought about that is that I feel as though the resources of that are from a more local, or at least a national standpoint, where it's sort of a one and done deal, where I imagine more relatively commonplace materials are less industrialized, for a better word.
Right.
Materials are used, such as more reliance on wood and such, and either this is made in your local community, or you get this from a single buyer. But once you've gotten it from that single buyer away from your community, I imagine you'll making assumptions of the lifestyle. You use this for the rest of your life. I imagine this is a very prolonged, resilient structure, and I feel as though for the use of it, there's very minimal pollution, if any, that's really even measured. I feel like it equates with the bicycle in the sense that there's only the necessary heat pollution that comes with every single thing in the universe that does work. Perhaps you could also go and say that the need to have a horsepower could lead to pollution, because eventually that horse needs to be fed, and that brings into the case where do you get the food, and where does the waste go? So those are my thoughts on that.
Well, that's good stuff. Hannah, you're nodding your head. You want to add something to that?
Now I was just going to like kind of agree like with the horse and like the environmental impacts that would have, though it's obviously not that great. But yeah, just like the caring for it, like feeding it, it's going to need like a place to stay. So maybe having to like use materials to build like a barn and that sort of thing. So yeah.
What about the uses in here too? What are these? I mean, and you guys are kind of getting at these things, but what's the energy source for these different? And this is actually a little bit more complicated. I just bought that car this last year. I used to last spring. I would have had a picture of my 1997 Honda Civic, which unfortunately died last year, which is why I got the electric vehicle. But that's what I used to have there. But talk a little bit about the use and the energy sources. You guys are talking about that, but what are these guys dependent on in terms of energy sources? Alyssa, what do you think? I'm going to put you on the spot. Hey, you don't want to. You can pass. I can put Kayla on the spot if you don't want to be put on the spot. I'm just looking at my boxes. Okay, not enough caffeine in Alyssa's system yet. That's okay. Kayla, what do you think? Kayla, do you want to give it a shot? Okay, Larissa. Oh no, Kayla, you're up. Okay, good.
Okay, it's Kala.
Kayla, sorry.
That's okay. So the energy usage, or like where the energy comes from the horse. Well, for the buggy, that would be from the horse, which would come from grain, which is like, I guess that would be kind of like second in the, or like the grain is probably like plant-based. So but it's still not like directly coming from plants because the grain has to be processed.
Correction, I actually have a feeling that on an Amish farm, it's probably all grown on their
Grass.
farm because that's kind of what they do. The
Oh,
Amish farm. So it's probably sunlight that fell onto their farm that was converted into hay or silage and fed to the horses. So it probably is pretty straight up grown on their farm.
Yeah, okay. And then for the car, it would be electricity. And for the bike, it would just be your own power, which so I guess that would be kind of like the horse. It would be coming from your food.
Right. Okay, good. So you've got that embodied chain of stuff there, but what's different about this car from other cars is this car could actually be running on renewable energy as opposed to sort of fundamentally fossil fuel based stuff. Okay, good stuff. How does each technology influence the way the user experiences the physical environment? So now we're transitioning into this second question, less about the impact of the technology, the direct impacts of the technology, and more about how it affects the human relationship, the human relationship with the physical environment. How would someone experiencing these different, how does the person in the buggy, the person on the bike, and the person in the car experience the physical environment? And I'm just going to call on some different people just for the heck of it. Brock, what do you say?
For the user experience, the horse and the buggy, I guess, is not the fastest, so it's not the most convenient all the time, considering you have to take a horse places, which can't really park a horse, I guess.
They do park horses, but yes.
Well, but yeah, it will need to be moved much quicker than a car or a bike necessarily. Cars are probably the most efficient. Humans use them the most, I'd say. They can go fast, they can go far, you get there quickly. And a bike, while it's probably the best for the environment, maybe, it's actually a pretty convenient transport. It goes pretty quick compared to walking. And so it's a pretty good source. It's easy to put away. You don't need much to maintain it. So yeah.
That's good. Let me ask someone else about kind of the experience of it. How are you, Ava, how are you experiencing the physical environment when you're in each of these things? So everything you said is great, Brock, but I also want to get at like what your relationship is with the natural environment when you're using these. Yeah, go Ava.
Well, with the buggy and the bike, you're outside in the environment, like not enclosed like you are in the car. And also with the bike, you're physically pedaling and you're making the bike move with your motions. So you can kind of feel the ground, and you can also feel the ground in the buggy as well. But I would say the car is the most removed because you're just sitting and driving and with your hands, but that doesn't really have much impact with the ground or the outside surroundings of the world.
Right, and obviously there's sort of the weather aspect there too. If you're in either the, I mean, you may have a cover for the horse carriage in inclement weather, but you're still, you probably don't have a heater in the thing, so you're probably experiencing the physical environment pretty directly on that. And obviously with the bike too, maybe slightly lesser with the horse. You experience the terrain. If you've got a hill, you're putting more, you're kind of very in touch with the physical environment on that bike. And I think for most of us, especially on long car rides, you can go for huge stretches where you just totally tune out the natural environment. It's just, you've got whatever tunes you've got playing or audiobooks you're listening to. And, if someone asked you 10 minutes later, what did you go through over the last 10 minutes? You might not even be able to answer them because you're so in your own little environment and, totally separate from the physical world. So you kind of want to think about that. These are all technologies, which could get you from point A to point B. Obviously the point A and point B need to be a lot closer together if it's the cart or the bike. But you could use any of the three of them. But you're having these really different experiences there. And so let's quickly get to this final question. How is each technology influenced by, and how does it influence economic, political, and social relationships? This question might be a little bit more complex, but it's a very important one to think about. And in my random walk here, maybe I'll call on Phoebe.
Oh, geez.
You can always pass, so don't feel embarrassed about that. But but give it a shot.
I'm gonna pass.
Okay, Willa. Oh, I'm gonna go back to Alyssa actually, because Alyssa's woken up a little bit and wants to go. You go, Alyssa.
Okay. I feel like with each of these transportations, I feel like in some world, everyone thinks that what they're doing is like the most efficient for themselves, you know, not considering like if people can't actually afford a car, so they have to bike. But like, because the people with the bike usually are like, you know, they're more environmentally conscious, so they think that what they're doing is really good. And then people with cars need to get from point A to point B really quickly, so they think they're doing what's most efficient. And then people with buggies think they're doing, you know, what's right religiously and like culturally. So everyone kind of has their own opinion. And then like economically, obviously some people have to bike because they have no other option. And then like Amish people can't, it's kind of hard to like leave your, I don't know what you'd call it, settlement, I guess, I don't know. So they're forced into that. So I feel like you sometimes have choice as to what you want to do, but most of it is like influenced by your job and like your social status and like what you can actually afford to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else wanna add anything to that that last one? Well, I'm going to do a little anecdote here because I think it builds on some of what Alyssa is saying here. There's an Amish farmer a bit south of here in Worcester named David Klein, who several of us in the environmental studies program used to have a relationship with. I actually haven't been in contact with him for a long time now. But he's good friends with my colleague David Orr, and he called him up after the 9/11 bombing, and he called him up from a payphone because the Amish don't have phones in their house. So he went down to a payphone the day after, you know, the bombing of the World Trade Center, and he called up David Orr and he said to David, you know what, I just want to tell you that was not an Amish person. And David thought about that for a long time, figuring out, what is he telling me? And, you know, I think part of what David concluded he was being told is that, like, you know, David Klein was communicating that, you know, our whole technological system doesn't allow us to do something like that. We've constructed a system in which we don't have the capacity to cause harm to other people in that way because of the sort of like world of technology we've chosen. We can't do that sort of thing, you know. So anyways, that's one statement. I'll give you another anecdote. I actually visited David Klein way back when I was a college student at Oberlin. And I was looking at his son's buggy, and I was noticing it had a stereo in it, a really nice car stereo in it. And not only that, it had drum brakes on the wheels. And I'm like, David, what's going on here? You know, I thought you guys were about, you know, like, you know, staying with this older technology. And he said, well, you know, when you're an adolescent in the Amish community, you're actually not that different from, you know, adolescents in your community. You basically want to go really fast in your buggy. And if you want to go really fast, you know, you need really good brakes, otherwise you're going to crash. Anyway, I just thought it was funny the way and I think Chia talked a little bit about this too with the snowmobiles. I think this is sort of a similar situation. The snowmobiles, you know, those front loaders that were moving the whale, how, you know, indigenous communities, I think you can look at the Amish to some extent in that sort of light. You know, they can selectively choose what they want to adapt and what they don't want to adapt, and they make choices about how that affects their culture. And from David Klein's perspective, you know, the addition of a good stereo and the addition of you know, higher tech brakes on the buggy didn't in any sense sort of violate, you know, the sort of cultural norms within their own community. And it's been really interesting to see how the Amish have adopted certain technology. And there are different orders of Amish, so it gets pretty complex. But I think for the most part, they draw the line at being connected with the grid, the electrical grid. So some of them use solar energy. They'll have solar panels and battery storage systems, and they don't have a problem with doing that, but they will not connect on the grid. They're sort of keeping themselves separate from the larger technological system. Anyways, super interesting stuff, but it has all these embodied, kind of consequences and reflections of our economic system. So I wanted to kind of prime your thinking. It may be odd to be thinking about transportation as we prepare to talk about genetically modified crops, but I wanted to kind of get you thinking about those sort of central questions. And to say a couple things in conclusion before we get into the case. One is that when we think about the way technology affects the social order, there's again a bunch of different implications for the impacts they might have. So one impact has to do with the selection and application of technologies. There's a great example of this in the Langdon Winter reading, in which he talks about Robert Moses and the transportation infrastructure in New York City. And Robert Moses is this sort of towering figure over the architecture and infrastructure of New York City, which he was in charge of for many, many years. But one of the most infamous and darkest things he did was to build bridges that were too low, build overpasses over highways that were too low for buses to go under. And it really was kind of a simple infrastructural choice. It didn't have to do with sort of fancy technology. It was just how high are your bridges? But basically they prevented public transportation from getting from the city to the beaches on Long Island, thereby essentially preventing low-income people, mostly people of color, from making it onto the beaches. So effectively, this technological choice, which perpetuates even today in terms of access to public beaches, was embodied in just the decisions about how bridges were built. So very, very powerful. Again, it's not about bridge technology per se, it's about how the bridge technology was implemented. So that's one thing, is like, how do you apply a technology in a situation and how does that impact social relationships? But then the second is technologies which may just sort of, by the inherent nature of the technology, influence social relationships. So bridges by themselves don't influence social relationships, but certain types of technologies do influence social relationships and political relationships. And the choice about whether to adopt them may have profound consequences. Just as an example of that, when we think about people thinking about addressing climate change, there are people who are big proponents of nuclear power as a solution to climate change, because it's relatively, it actually does require carbon to mine the uranium and that sort of stuff. But they do run on splitting atoms, and once they're running, they're sort of fossil fuel free in terms of their actual running, and they can produce enormous amounts of energy. But they're also really dangerous, and you don't want people getting in there and doing bad things to them, because they have the potential to cause major problems in terms of pollution. If someone were to fly a plane into one of those, you could contaminate a huge area. And we've had the Chernobyl accident, which basically closed down a very large area of landscape for good because of that. As opposed to solar energy, which is very decentralized. Nuclear is very centralized. Solar is inherently decentralized. It has to be spread over large areas to capture sunlight. Same sort of situation with wind. So my point is that these are different options for a carbon-free future, but they actually have very different political and technological implications and social implications because of the nature of the technologies. Solar is inherently decentralized. Nuclear is inherently centralized. It's just fundamental to the nature of how they're producing electricity. And here's a quote from Dennis Hayes, who was, the founding organizer of Earth Day and chairman of the American Solar Energy Society for many years. But this is a quote from way back in the 70s. The increased deployment of nuclear power facilities must lead society towards authoritarianism. Indeed, safe reliance upon nuclear power as the principal source of energy may be possible only in a totalitarian state. Dispersed solar sources are more compatible than centralized technology with social equity, freedom, and cultural pluralism. That's quite a statement about the, I'm not necessarily saying I completely agree with that statement, but that's quite a statement about the social and political relationships that are embodied in the technology itself. So I want you to think about that. Lots of other examples. I don't want to talk about these in length, but just a choice about whether you dry your clothes on the line versus whether you use a dryer. Obviously, if you're hanging your clothes outside, you need to actually adjust your cleaning schedule to match the resources outside. I can't do a wash today. We do have a big clothesline outside my house. Couldn't do a wash today if we wanted to use the dryer. We have to wait until the weather is compatible. So we're adjusting our human behaviors based on the nature of the technology, simple technology. It involves a line and clips. But we have to adjust our behavior to suit the environmental conditions. Whereas, we do have a dryer. I can wash anytime I want, just throw the stuff in there. It's irrelevant what's going on outside in terms of what I do. Then you get into real complexity, things like computers, where, you could make any number of cases about how they affect people's relationship to each other. The fact that we can be here together and see each other's faces and kind of have a conversation while there's a global pandemic going on is a testament to computers' ability to really connect us. But obviously, you can make a strong case that in many ways, computers have allowed us to socially isolate from each other in important ways. So enormous amounts of complexity when you begin to think about technologies. It's not an easy, you may be able to say something about solar cells and nuclear that are pretty clear in terms of their impact, but there are a lot of technologies which just have so much complexity in terms of how they engage with us. Okay, so shifting off technology in a sort of generic sense towards moving towards the technologies that are involved in this case. We're going to do a little bit more study of agricultural systems, but I need to give you a little heads up, and much of this is in the case. Important to understand the Green Revolution. There have been 3 green revolutions, what we call green revolutions. The first green revolution, which occurred after World War II, was just dramatic increases in yield as a result of highly genetically uniform varieties that were produced, varieties of crops, lots of use of fossil fuel-based fertilizers, irrigation, herbicides, and pesticides. Interestingly, as we've kind of talked a little bit about, the fertilizers, the herbicides, and the pesticides were in many ways byproducts of war technology. Ammonium nitrate is an explosive, so it was developed actually, following World War I. But so it's a great fertilizer. It's also an explosive. So the commercial production of it was as much about trying to create war technology as it was about trying to make food, but it was a great food. And a lot of our herbicides and pesticides are actually derived from chemical warfare, which is a kind of frightening thought, but true. A lot of the chemistry behind them was developed as a byproduct of war. So at any rate, mechanization, obviously very fossil fuel based, but it's allowed us to substantially increase the world's food production. And again, the first stage took place mostly in what we call the Western world, developed countries. Second stage was the expansion of a lot of hybrid specialized crops and fertilizer mechanization to the developing world. And now we're kind of in third stage, which involves introduction of genetically modified crops. And as I mentioned in the case study, or as we mentioned in the background to the case study, really most of the corn, the vast majority of corn and soybeans grown in the United States, which is to say the vast majority of food calories in the United States, are grown with genetically modified crops. I think a lot of people are not so aware of that. We're basically eating GMO crops all the time. It's just what we're doing. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the scenario for this case. So we've got an Indian researcher. She's proposing to develop a new insect and salinity-resistant strains of chickpea and rice. She's seeking funds to do this work from a nonprofit grant agency, the McKnight Foundation, and the foundation has solicited input from a group of experts you guys represent. These experts to give different opinions on whether or not they should fund this project or not. And so the discussion we just had is kind of the discussion I want you to have about genetically modified crops. What's the nature of the technology and this particular application of the technology? What's the weight of evidence supporting application? How might decisions affect economic, social, political, and environmental relationships in the communities and the country in which they're applied? This is in India. And at the end of the day, should it be funded? And if you do recommend funding this, what are the stipulations you might apply to try to rectify some of the concerns of stakeholders and address their concerns in ways that would ameliorate or mitigate any negative impacts of those. So here's the structure of what we're going to be doing. We're going to have a brief little period in which I'll put you in, I'll create 4 groups, and character A, B, and C, and D should go into groups 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively, give you about 7 minutes in those groups. And then I'm going to pull you out to give your presentations. It's the same setup as the other cases, so it's the same deal. If we're missing any members from any groups, I'm happy to play any of those members, and I will just stay in the central room. But I'll pull you all out of the expert groups before we go into our working groups. Oops, I don't know what that's doing there. Oh, this is weird. I had changed this. Yes, no, that makes sense. Yes, no, that all makes sense. Okay, good. All right, let me, I'm no longer sharing the screen. So I am now going to create 4 breakout groups. Do people understand what we're doing? All right, so recreate. I want 4 groups. Okay, so you guys are ready to go? So you guys are going to need to migrate. So you've been made co-hosts and you're going to be randomly dumped into a room and you have to shift. If you're grouped a character, you're going to want to go into group 1, etc. So you're going to migrate as soon as I do this. So yeah, go ahead. So you're going to have to join and then shift to the other group. Hey, Rowan, you're still here. Emma, Hannah, and Farley, do you guys need me to do something, or are you able to do what you need to do? I know sometimes students are on devices that don't let them shift somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I can shift from breakout rooms.
I have like
Okay.
a button for breakout room, but it doesn't really do anything when I click it.
Okay, Michael, what room are you supposed to be in?
Group 4.
Okay, you should be able to go into group 4 now. Ava, what group should you be in?
1.
And Farley, what group should you be in?
Group 3.
Where are you in this list? Okay, you want to be in group 3. Okay. Okay, Brock, where should you be?
I should also be in group 3. I have the option to switch, but for some reason, room 3 is not appearing.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the same issue.
Even now, even after I set you up.
I just got an invite to it, but
Okay, both of you should have invites. Farley, you do not have an invite into group?
I still don't. I still like the option for like to click breakout rooms, but it doesn't like actually. Oh, there it is. I see it. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, great. All right. I don't know if you're actually there. I hope you guys were having a good discussion. All right, so we are going to follow the same practices that we have followed in the other two cases, in that what I'm now going to do is put you into groups in which you basically have 3 minutes per person to 3 minutes per character to make your case, and 1 minute for Q&A. So your role is to stay in your character's position and present that viewpoint to the larger group. So we're just going to go A, B, C, and D, and I'll give you a heads up timing wise. I'll broadcast a message to the group when it's time to make changes. But I'm hoping that most of you will be put in the correct rooms, but basically you want to go into the room number that corresponds to your group number. Let's get it set up and see if it works. See if it does it right. Does everyone understand how this is working? Same deal as last time. If you are missing a member, just come out into the main room and I will be that member of your group. So just exit, come and join me, and I'll argue whatever the position is you're missing. And then you can go back into your groups. Everyone everyone all set?
I have a question.
Yes.
Who is the primary writer for this week? Or
this should be since this is your third case, this should be D. You kind of want to think about it doesn't matter what character you represented in this. You're then representing the McKnight Foundation. So you're going to kind of shift your thinking about this. So yeah, it should be I'm sorry, did I say D? It's C. Person C should be the person writing this up by default. If you want to switch, let me know, and I'm okay with that, but that's the default. You guys ready? All right, Hannah and Emma, do you guys need me to move you, or are you missing members? Hannah and Emma, are you guys here? All right, Ava, where do you need to go?
I need to be in group 10.
Okay. Michael, where do you need to go? You happen to be right in
Group 6.
Oops, where'd you go? Okay, you should have gotten an invite, and
okay, yeah.
And Ava, wait, you said group 10, right?
Yeah, and I'm in group 2.
Well, if you're in group 2, you want to be in group 2.
No. Like the one that you put me in, I think was 2. Okay, never mind. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Cool. So am I a pro GM environmentalist?
Yeah, you're pro GM.
Okay, well, this is an easy position for me to argue. I mean, the basic premise here is that, for some reason, environmentalists have decided that genetically modified crops are a terrible thing. It actually makes no sense to me. It's just the technology we're applying. We like solar energy. We like wind turbines. This is just genetically engineering crops. And it seems to me, frankly, to be kind of anti-science that we're opposed to this particular technology as opposed to other technologies. And I think the conundrum here is that a lot of what's happened out there with genetically modified crops is bad application. You have these large companies like Monsanto, which are centralizing control and frankly doing some really terrible things using genetically modified crops. But the question I'd ask of you, is it a problem with the technology, or is it a problem with how this particular technology is being applied within a capitalist system? And I think what we really need to look at in this particular case is this researcher. This researcher is asking for public dollars from us. She's promising that she's going to, first of all, develop seeds that the farmers themselves can replant, so that they're not going to be dependent. Once they have the seeds, they're not going to be dependent on some corporation. In fact, they're not going to be dependent on a corporation at all. This is we're developing this as basically open source technology for the farmers, not as something controlled by some agribusiness or something. So it's a very, very different context in which this technology is being applied. And I think we, as a group of people who care about helping to foster self-sufficiency within the Indian population, need to consider this particular application of the technology, which I think is going to help them do that. From an environmental standpoint, what we're talking about here is creating seeds that allow a farmer to use a lot less pesticide. So right now they're applying, horrible synthetic pesticides to try to protect their crops, or they're allowing their crops to be destroyed by insects. Here we're talking about modifying the crop so that the crop itself provides protection against that, and they can use a lot less pesticide, and all of the damage and fossil fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions associated with that pesticide go away. To me, there's some risks involved here, but they're risks we should do something about. Okay, questions? Darn it, one slightly over there. All right, we're done. We need to move on. Sorry. Okay, go back to your groups, unless I have to do another character here for you. Hey, are you guys wanting me to do anti-GMO activist?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just think we need to be really, really cautious in thinking about this, about how this technology fits into sort of the global system of genetically modified crops. I understand that this researcher is claiming that this particular application is outside of the multinational corporations, but I just think it's important for us to recognize that that GMO is really dominated by large industrial corporations. And I'm very skeptical that we can keep it out of that sort of context. At the end of the day, even if the researcher is providing these at low cost to farmers, you have to sort of consider the question of, is this creating a dependency of the farmer, a fundamental dependency of the farmer on a sort of like, GMO industrial complex that exists within the world. It's technology that has to be done within centralized research institutions. Right now, as I say, most of that's being done within a sort of business capitalist context. I understand this research is a little bit different, but I just think it's important to understand the context in which GMO crops are playing out. And I'm just very concerned that at the end of the day, once you've created that dependence of the farmer, on this technology that's created in centralized government or business organizations, that dependence is permanent and has the potential for negative implications for self-sufficiency. And I would just point out that globally, there's enough food available to feed the world without doing this. And so I think if we look at it in a global context, it is possible to produce food without doing this. And I just think this is the wrong decision to sort of move towards more GMO crops. And I will let you guys ask questions now. Well, I totally convinced you, huh? Did I really convince you?
Um,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So the person A in our group said that like in India there is not enough food, but like I'm not really, there's a like conflict, and you are saying that like there is enough food in the world.
There's enough food in the world. I think their argument is focused on there being enough food in India. Actually, I think her argument is that there's enough food, but there's not enough protein, and yeah, so yeah. Yeah, I have kind of a global argument, the character I'm playing right now. And, one might question it on the basis of, yeah, but how does that affect self-sufficiency of India? And is it reasonable to want to distribute that food? I think there's a lot of holes in my argument. I'm happy to make the argument, but I think it's personally, it's my least favorite position to argue. There's an argument for it, though. A lot of people out there making this argument, so they just don't like GMO, man. It's bad. It's evil. It's going to harm the world. All right, I'm going to send you guys back into your groups because I want you guys to now talk about, try to figure out some sort of recommendation here.
Okay.
Yes, Leila.
Professor Peter, I was wondering if I could ask a question of your old pro GMO environmentalist
Yeah.
position. I was just going to ask how
If the
you
rest
would-
of you want to abandon, you should abandon because you should be talking now. Let me just broadcast to the group. Okay, cool. Sorry, ask the question. I'm multitasking. I'm bad at it.
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to ask about how you would prevent or potentially like mitigate the effects of the creation of like super weeds.
You know, that has been I think a lot could be done in terms of rolling this out in a controlled way and, you know, building good research around it. Maybe, you know, not doing it all at once, but having some test applications where you have groups of, you know, a controlled group of farmers doing this first and, you know, see if there's any evidence of spread of this. You know, that sort of superweed situation mostly has to do when you're inserting pesticide resistance into crops, not when you're inserting resistance to organisms. So, you know, most of that's been about like Roundup type situations where you insert genes that make it not damaged by weed killers, and then the weed killers don't work on weeds anymore if the weeds get it in there. It's also actually, frankly, pretty restricted. It has been found. It's the same is true of the sort of damage to butterflies, which is mentioned in one of the cases.
Yeah, that was also mine.
It's pretty constrained, those studies. It's like pretty isolated. So they're real, you know, and I think you want to construct a situation which addresses the possibilities and, you know, deals with, I think the precautionary principle in character 3 is one you do want to seriously think about how you prevent, how you mitigate the potential for danger. I think that's an important thing to think about, you know, but I think you can figure out a pathway between those two positions, frankly.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
We'll discuss.
Are you guys in a group alone today?
Yeah, it's just us.
Oh, well, I'm happy to hang out with you then. What are you guys thinking?
Well, I mean, I don't see a great argument for not funding the research.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Then I think the real question for you guys is really focused on, okay, what are the stipulations, how do you construct a situation in which you minimize the risks that are expressed in position, you know, the third and fourth position, I think.
Mm-hmm. Is there any chance in this? I guess maybe not because it's like direct funding, but in this case study, there being like pushback from other people, or is it just like a contained thing?
It's contained within this this is a funding organization that will provide funds or not. And you can decide the conditions under which they provide those funds, but there's nothing else you need to worry about.
Okay, because the thing about papayas and stuff in Hawaii was intense.
It was an interesting situation, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Strange people on different sides of that issue, you know? I think people, environmentalists in this country seriously oversimplify the GMO situation. You know, I will say I am character number 2 in this. I just feel like there's no sustainable path forward where we reject GMO technology. I just feel like it's the place in which environmentalists act like climate deniers, in which they don't want to deal with science. Like, yeah, there are corporations doing horrible stuff with GMO crops. I will be the first one to say that. They are really doing this badly, really badly. But is that the technology, or is that the context in which it's being applied? I mean, you can do a lot of, computers are doing horrible things. The you know, right-wing kooks are like organizing, you know, using the internet. Does that mean the internet's a terrible thing? I don't think so, you know?
That's true.
All the militias doing all their horrible stuff. It's all based on computer technology. Should we like throw computer technology away? Anyway, I'm gonna send a quick note to people. So you guys can keep talking, but I gotta do that.
Yeah, I think as long as we find a way for like I think the what am I talking about? The foundation wanted to patent the GM like the GM crops themselves so that no other company could like take it, right? And I think that could maybe go in a bad direction. I think we want to make sure that there's no possibility of them selling that patent or making Indian farmers like dependent on the genetically modified crops.
That seems like a really reasonable stipulation to me.
I'm curious, in my cautious environmentalist little explanation, it talks about like the practice of rotating grain crops and legumes and like all the topsoil depletion and stuff. Is there any way that we can like address that while also creating?
Why not? You can do whatever you want. You can be creative. Okay. You could say, we want to do this, but we also want to do these other things that this is, we don't, I mean, I think actually that would be like a more systemic thing to say, okay, this seems like it's going to be useful, but we want to make sure it's being done in the context of addressing a number of other issues. I mean, the question is whether to fund this researcher. So I don't think you can go completely far afield and say, we want to transform agriculture in India because it's really about this. But if you were doing like, you know, if you were doing experiments with farms before you rolled it out completely, I think you could say, we want to do these other things as well to see if we can address these other issues. Why not?
Okay, I think, yeah. To remember what we're actually, who we're writing to and what we're asking for.
You're writing to the foundation, making a recommendation about how they spend their money. Hey folks, if anyone has any questions, you guys are free to ask me. Class is over. We're gonna work, so you can bail too. But
okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye, Becca.
Thank you.
Bye, Lula. Bye, Phoebe.
Oh wait, I have one other question.
Sure.
Just about the community voices, like transcription of the interview. I like got like consent to use the quotes and stuff, but I forgot to copy you on that email. Do you want?
Oh, can you just forward your email to me? Because I just want, I do want to have that just like in my records. That's great. Sure. Okay. Who'd you interview again?
It was Maddie Goetsky. Is that?
Not Maddie Gefke. Gefke.
No. She was an art history major.
Oh, maybe I don't know her. I know most.
Yeah, because I kind of went in like assuming
that I did.
That you did, or that she like had an idea of like what the class was, or maybe took it, but then I was like, oh no, this is like a new thing.
Yeah, no, we asked for volunteers, so I knew some of the people. I mean, people I know were more likely to volunteer, but yeah, was it a good interview?
Yeah, I mean, she was very friendly and had a lot to say. It was a lot of it kind of ended up being about not entirely like environmental sustainability because she was an art history major and like that. I mean, it was about like community engagement, but it was also a lot about like art museums and what are art museums, like, who are they for and that kind of thing. But it was a good interview, so.
Good. I'm glad it worked well.
Thank you.
Hey guys, class is over. I'm just hanging out and answering any questions anyone has. So hope you guys had a good discussion. Did you have a good discussion? Bye, Larissa. Yeah, I only see the bottom half of your face, but that's okay. There you are.
We had a question about like the process of farms actually using this genetically modified crop. Like, so the scientist is developing it. Is it then sold directly to farmers, or is it sold to like a corporation that will then distribute it to farmers?
I think you have some choice. I think there's some ambiguity. You're funding the researcher to develop this, but in your stipulations, you could decide, because it's unspecified. I mean, I think what is specified is that I think she specifies it's going to be sold at cost. So I think it is. So then there's really, there's no corporation involved in the sense that any corporation involved isn't making money off of it because there's no profit. So I don't know. You can decide how you do that. That's like up to you to sort of stipulate at some level.
How does this often work?
How does this often work?
Like after something like a genetically modified crop is created, like where does it go from there?
That's a really good question. So an awful lot of the crops, which I think has to do with an awful lot of the opposition, does take place in the context of corporations, and then it's just distributed through their, they sell seeds. They're all like, Monsanto is probably the biggest seller of seeds and agrochemicals to put on the seeds, and so they have developed a very integrated system for that. But for government-funded stuff, it really depends on the government and the particular agricultural bureaus that they have. In the U.S., the USDA is oftentimes kind of, I won't say in bed with, but connected with, and all of our agricultural schools are unfortunately very connected with and funded to some extent by large agribusiness, which I think makes it difficult to get separation. I frankly don't know the details of like Indian government agriculture and exactly how that works. I mean, the point from my perspective wasn't to be accurate in how it would work politically in India. So I think you have some flexibility in stipulating, for instance, it will be done through local farm cooperatives or something like that. It will be distributed. You have choice in how you want to do it, Cal. Got your name right that time.
Nice.
Any other questions? All right. Guys, have a good day. Take care.
You.
Yeah,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.